is the year 1965. There's a tiny island, so tiny that if you zoom in on Google Maps, you can barely even spot it. Its area, just 733 square kilometers, smaller than Delhi, smaller than Mumbai, smaller even than New York City. And on this tiny little place, there's nothing. No oil, no gas, no minerals, no land to grow anything on. There's barely any space for farming. They don't even have their own drinking water. Even it has to be imported from outside. Pipelines come in from the neighboring country, Malaysia. That's where the water comes from. Just imagine a country that doesn't even have its own water, dependent on someone else for the most basic necessity of life. Now think about this. If someone told you that this place, this tiny, poor, resourceless island, would one day become one of the richest, safest, cleanest, and most efficient countries in the world. And honestly, thinking that in 1965, it genuinely seemed like madness. Because at that time, the state of this island was something like this. Poverty was everywhere. Unemployment was at crisis levels. People had no jobs. They were living in slums, in cramped, dirty, unsafe conditions. Racial tensions were so intense that in 1964, full-blown riots broke out between the Chinese and Malay communities. People attacked each other. Blood was spilled on the streets. More than 30 people died. Communist groups were trying to expand their influence. British colonial rule was coming to an end. But what did they leave behind? A fragile, underdeveloped, divided society. And the cherry on top, this island had just been kicked out of its own country. Yes, you heard that right. Singapore didn't ask for independence. Singapore was expelled. Malaysia held a vote in parliament, unanimously, and kicked Singapore out of the federation. And on that day, something happened that the world had never seen before. August 9th, 1965, a press conference was underway. Cameras were being set up, journalists were seated, and a man stepped up to the microphone. His name was Lee Kuan Yew. He was Singapore's prime minister, educated at Cambridge University, sharp, intelligent, articulate, a brilliant lawyer turned politician. The kind of leader people had always seen as strong, composed, and unshakable. This man never flinched, never showed emotion. He was made of steel. But that day was different. Lee Kuan Yew announced the separation agreement. He told everyone that Singapore was no longer part of Malaysia. Singapore was now an independent, sovereign nation. And then he stopped. His eyes welled up, his throat choked, and right there in front of the cameras, in front of the entire world, Lee Kuan Yew broke down and cried. These weren't tears of joy. This wasn't a celebration. This was a leader who knew that his country's future was now a question mark, a big question mark. Later, he said it himself, and these are his exact words.
It will be a moment of anguish. All my life.
It was a moment of anguish. All my life, I believed in merger and the unity of these two territories. This is a moment of anguish. This wasn't just a political event for him. It was a personal tragedy. He had built his entire political career on the belief that Singapore couldn't survive alone, that the merger was essential, that without Malaysia, Singapore was a heart without a body, his own words. And now that body had been ripped away, only the heart was left. Small, weak, alone, the world watched and thought, this country is finished. How will it function? What will it eat? What will it sell? What army will it use to protect itself? Experts said, Singapore is not viable as an independent nation. It cannot survive. But this is where the real twist in the story comes. Because Lee Kuan Yew, as emotional as he was that day, was equally dangerous in his determination. He cried, yes, but that crying wasn't his weakness. That crying was his humanity. And what happened after those tears is the most extraordinary transformation in modern history. Lee Kuan Yew decided that he would turn this tiny island, this that on the map, as larger countries mockingly called it, into a country that no one in the world could ignore. And he did it. For 31 years, from 1959 to 1990, Lee Kuan Yew led Singapore as prime minister, without stopping, without tiring. And when he finally stepped down from the PM's post in 1990, what did Singapore become? A country whose GDP per capita had grown from $500 to over $65,000. That's not growth, that's a miracle. This happened in one generation, within one person's lifetime. A country that was now richer than the United States, the United Kingdom, and Japan in per capita income. A country where over 90% of people own their homes. That figure is among the highest in the entire world. A country where corruption is practically zero, consistently ranked among the least corrupt nations on the planet. A country whose airport is considered the best airport in the world again and again. A country whose schools rank in the top 3 globally in math, in science, and reading. A country where the crime rate is so low that people can safely walk around at 2 a.m. at night. Now you tell me, all of this was achieved by a tiny, resourceless, rejected island. How? That's the question. And that's the story of this video. In simple terms, this is a story of nation building. A story that proves that if the leadership is right, the vision is clear, and the execution is ruthless, then no problem in the world is unsolvable. But, and this is very important, this is no fairy tale. This isn't some simple, feel-good success story where everything went great and everyone lived happily ever after. This story has sacrifices, it has trade-offs, it has controversial decisions. There are restrictions on press freedom. There's suppression of political opposition. There are strict laws, so strict that the world has even called Singapore authoritarian. There's a ban on chewing gum here. Yes, seriously, chewing gum since 1992. Why? Because people were sticking gum on the doors of the new MRT, meaning the metro system, which was causing costly malfunctions. The punishment for drug trafficking, mandatory death penalty. Let's get to the real story. Who was the man who turned a sinking ship into an aircraft carrier? Who were the warriors who, without resources, without an army, without any support, built a nation from scratch? Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding father. It's George Washington. It's Ataturk. It's nation builder in chief. But Lee Kuan Yew wasn't born a leader. His story is also a journey. And understanding that journey is essential. Because once you understand where this man came from, you understand how he thought. Lee Kuan Yew was born on September 16, 1923, in Singapore, into a Hakka Chinese family, meaning his roots were Chinese, but he was born in a British colony. This is very important because it means that from childhood, Lee Kuan Yew saw 2 worlds. Eastern values, family, discipline, hard work, respect for elders. In Western systems, law, governance, institutions, the English language. His family was upper middle class, comfortable, but not ultra rich. His grandfather was English educated. His father was also English speaking. So Lee Kuan Yew received an English medium education from childhood. This advantage came in very handy later, but it also came with a price. Lee Kuan Yew couldn't fluently speak his mother tongue, Chinese, specifically Hakka and Mandarin, initially. He corrected this later. He taught himself Mandarin as an adult, because he realized that if he wanted to connect with the Chinese-speaking majority, he needed to know their language. Just imagine, a country's leader learning the language of his own majority population in his 30s. Now comes the event that fundamentally changed Lee Kuan Yew. 1942. Lee Kuan Yew was only 18 to 19 years old at the time, and Japan attacked Singapore. The British forces, who were supposedly powerful, who were supposedly going to protect Singapore, they lost. And they didn't just lose, they lost embarrassingly. Shamefully, February 15, 1942, British Lieutenant General Arthur Percival surrendered to Japanese General Yamashita. This was the largest surrender in British military history. Over 80,000 British, Indian, and Australian troops were captured. And Singapore? Singapore fell under Japanese occupation. Now to understand this, the Japanese occupation was brutal, especially for the Chinese population. Japanese soldiers carried out an operation called Sukching, meaning purge through cleansing. Chinese men were lined up, screened, and anyone deemed anti-Japanese was taken to the beach and mass executed. Estimates vary. Some say 25,000 to 50,000 Chinese civilians were killed. Some historians put the numbers even higher. Lee Kuan Yew, an 18 to 19-year-old young man, was watching all of this with his own eyes. He himself was almost caught up in Sukching. At a screening center, he was made to stand in line. He escaped by the skin of his teeth. If that guard hadn't let him go that day, there would be no Singapore story. History itself would have been different. This experience taught Lee Kuan Yew two things that became the entire foundation of his political philosophy. First, power matters. Only power matters. The British had power, they lost it, and everything was over. No law could save anyone. No institution could save anyone. When the power was gone, everything was gone. Lee Kuan Yew never forgot this lesson. Second, no one will protect you. No one will fight for you. No one will save you. You ensure your own security, your own survival by yourself. Otherwise you die. These are harsh lessons. These are cynical lessons, but these are real lessons. And Lee Kuan Yew applied these lessons throughout his entire life. The war ended. 1945, Japan surrendered. The British came back, and Lee Kuan Yew decided, I need to study the best possible education from the best university in the world. And off he went to Cambridge University, England. Fitzwilliam College. He studied law, and he didn't just study. He graduated with first-class honors. Double-starred first. That's Cambridge's highest distinction, meaning this man was genuinely brilliant academically. But Cambridge didn't just teach Lee Kuan Yew law. Cambridge gave him something else that was perhaps even more important. At Cambridge, Lee Kuan Yew saw the British colonial system from the inside. He came to understand how the British think, how they run governments, how they build institutions, how they maintain power. He understood that colonial rulers, no matter how civilized they may be, ultimately work for their own interests, not for Singapore's. And it was at Cambridge that Lee Kuan Yew married his future wife, Kwa Geok Choo. She was also a law student at Cambridge. She was also brilliant, and she became Lee Kuan Yew's lifelong partner, both personally and intellectually. And listen, here's an interesting fact. Kwa Geok Choo actually scored higher marks than Lee Kuan Yew in some exams. So when people say there was a strong woman behind Lee Kuan Yew, she was literally an equally brilliant woman. After returning from Cambridge, Lee Kuan Yew was a transformed man. He had a world-class legal education, a deep understanding of the British system, first-hand observation of the colonial mentality, and a burning desire to free Singapore, to give his people a dignified life. Now he was ready for politics. (1954). Remember this year. Lee Kuan Yew, along with some like-minded friends, intellectuals, and activists, they named it People's Action Party, HAP. Now here's something very interesting and complicated that you need to understand. What was PAP initially? Was it the clean, centrist, pro-business party that is today? Absolutely not. HAP started out as a socialist-leaning, anti-colonial movement. It talked about workers' rights. It was closely connected to labor unions. And this is the part most people don't know. There are communist elements inside PAP as well. Now, this might shock you, that Lee Kuan Yew, who later became a champion of capitalism, was allied with communists. But this is politics, and Lee Kuan Yew was a pragmatist. At that time, to fight against British colonial rule, Lee Kuan Yew needed mass support. And what was the mass support? Among the workers, in the labor unions, in the Chinese-speaking working class. And who could mobilize those people? The communists. Because communist organizers had grassroots networks. They had discipline. They had cadres who worked at the ground level. So Lee Kuan Yew formed a strategic alliance. He included the communists in PAP, used their organizing power, built mass support, and turned his party into a major political force. But, and this is very important, Lee Kuan Yew never believed in communism. He was using communism like a tool, a vehicle, a means to an end. He knew that one day he would have to get rid of these communist elements. And he did. But that part of the story comes a little later. For now, understand this. PAP was formed in 1954, and inside it there were two factions. The moderate English-educated faction, led by Lee Kuan Yew, Go Kum Swee, To Chin Chai, and S. Rajaratnam. These people were pragmatic, Western-educated, and believed in democratic socialism. initially, but they were not communists. The left-wing, Chinese-educated faction, communist sympathizers, trade unionists, student activists. These people were ideologically driven and wanted a genuine communist revolution. These two factions in one party, an uneasy alliance. Like two cats in the same house. How long could they last together? But at that time, both needed each other. Lee Kuan Yew needed mass support. The communists needed political legitimacy. 1955, limited elections were held in Singapore under partial self-governance. Lee Kuan Yew contested the election for the Tianjin Pagar constituency and won. He became the opposition leader. For the first time, he stepped onto the proper political stage. At that time, Singapore's chief minister was David Saul Marshall, a charismatic, flamboyant lawyer. Jewish background, dramatic personality. Marshall tried to negotiate full independence from the British, but he failed. He resigned. After him came Lim Yew Hock, another politician who struck a deal with the British and secured partial concessions. He also cracked down on communist agitators, which actually benefited Lee Kuan Yew indirectly because his communist rivals were weakened. And then came 1959. In 1959, elections were held in Singapore for full internal self-governance. PAP, under Lee Kuan Yew's leadership, won 43 out of 51 seats. Landslide victory, complete domination. And Lee Kuan Yew, at the age of 35, became Singapore's first prime minister. 35 years old. Just think about that. At 35, the responsibility of an entire country. A country that was falling apart. Where there was poverty, illiteracy, disease, racial tension, communist threats, and an uncertain future. This man set out to build a nation at 35. Now, there's a very important point that needs to be made clear here. Lee Kuan Yew was not alone. He was the visionary. He was the driving force. But he had an inner circle, a group of men who were equally brilliant, equally dedicated, and equally ruthless. Without understanding them, Singapore's story is incomplete. Because if Lee Kuan Yew was the architect, these men were the engineers, the builders, the strategists. Let's go. Let's meet these legends. If you had to choose a single architect of Singapore's economic miracle, one man who transformed Singapore from poor to rich, that name would be Goh Keng Swee. Goh Keng Swee studied at the London School of Economics. He did his PhD in economics. This man was a wizard with numbers, data-driven, analytical, and ruthlessly practical. Lee Kuan Yew had the vision. Goh Keng Swee had the plan. What did he do? Listen carefully, because this is the foundation of Singapore's economy. First move, he established the Economic Development Board, EDB, a government agency that served as a single window for foreign investors. Meaning if a multinational company wanted to set up a factory in Singapore, they didn't have to run around to 10 different departments. Come to EDB, everything happens here. Permits, land, tax incentives, labor, all in one place. This was revolutionary for its time. In other developing countries, approvals taking years. In Singapore, weeks, sometimes days. Second move, he developed the Jurong Industrial Estate. This was a massive industrial zone in the western part of Singapore. What was here before? Swamps, marshland, mud. There was nothing here. People mocked it. They called it Goh's folly, Goh's stupidity. Who's going to come here? No one's going to set up a factory in this mud. But Goh Keng Swee sent in the bulldozers, had roads built, put up infrastructure, and then invited multinational companies. Come, set up here. We'll give you everything you need. And they came. Texas Instruments came. National Semiconductor came. Hewlett-Packard came. Shell came. Esso came. Oil refineries came. Electronics factories came. Goh's folly, that mud pit, became Singapore's economic engine. Today, Jurong Industrial Estate is one of the largest industrial zones in the world. Third move, Goh Keng Swee also designed Singapore's defense strategy. He realized that a small country needs a credible military, otherwise neighboring countries won't take it seriously. This wasn't just military building, it was nation building. When boys from every community trained together, suffered together, drilled together, a shared identity is formed. A bond is created. National service built Singapore's army. and also built Singapore's identity. All of this was Go Kong Sui's brain. Without Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore wouldn't have had a vision. But without Go Kong Sui, that vision would have remained just a dream. Go turned the dream into a blueprint, and the blueprint into reality. Now let's meet the second key player, Sinnathamby Rajaratnam, or as everyone called him, Raja. Rajaratnam was of Sri Lankan Tamil origin. He was a journalist first, a writer, an intellectual, and one of Lee Kuan Yew's closest confidants. What was Rajaratnam's role? Two major contributions. First, foreign policy. Singapore was a tiny country sandwiched between giant neighbors. Indonesia to the south, a massive country 100 times bigger. Malaysia to the north, which had just kicked Singapore out. This was a hostile neighborhood. One wrong diplomatic move, and Singapore would be done. Rajaratnam designed Singapore's foreign policy, a careful, strategic, balanced approach. Don't make enemies with anyone. Don't become dependent on anyone. Trade with everyone. Maintain diplomatic relations with everyone. Champion international law. Stay active at the United Nations. And this was a game-changing move. Rajaratnam co-founded ASEAN in 1967, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand all came together. This was a regional cooperation framework. It was brilliant because through it, Singapore built an institutional relationship with its neighbors. It was no longer just about bilateral power dynamics. There was a multilateral framework. And within that framework, Singapore, despite being tiny, was an equal member. Second, national identity. Rajaratnam played a massive role in shaping Singapore's national identity. He raised the question, we are Singaporean. But what does that mean? Chinese? Malay? Indian? What is Singaporean identity? And he argued that Singaporean identity is none of these, and all of these simultaneously. A new identity was needed, an identity that rises above race, that rises above language. The Singapore Pledge, which every Singaporean student recites in school every single day, was written by Rajaratnam. We, the citizens of Singapore, pledge ourselves as one united people, regardless of race, language, or religion, to build a democratic society based on justice and equality. Regardless of race, language, or religion. These weren't just words. This was a philosophy, a nation-building philosophy. And this philosophy gave Singapore something that many multi-ethnic countries don't have, a shared identity. Rajaratnam, a Tamil, a minority, taught a majority Chinese country that identity isn't built on race, it's built on values. That was extraordinary. The third key player, Toh Chin Chye. Toh Chin Chye was PAP's chairman, its founding chairman. He was a physics professor before that, an academic, but his real contribution was an institution building. Toh Chin Chye built PAP's internal structure. He established the party's discipline. He organized election campaigns. He developed the ground-level cadre system, while Lee Kuan Yew was out delivering a vision and Go Kong Sui was planning the economy. Toh Chin Chye was strengthening the party from the inside. He was the backstage hero. He never came into the spotlight, but without him, there wouldn't even be a stage. Now, this one's interesting. In Singapore's success story, an known Singaporean also played a huge role, Albert Winsemius, a Dutch economist from the Netherlands. In 1960, the United Nations sent Winsemius to Singapore to conduct an economic survey in an advisory capacity. He came, he observed, he analyzed, and he gave Lee Kuan Yew two key pieces of advice which changed Singapore's trajectory. First piece of advice, do not remove the statue of Sir Stamford Raffles. This sounds weird, right? What difference does a statue make? A huge difference. Stamford Raffles was the British colonial officer who established Singapore as a trading post in 1819. He was a symbol of British colonialism. Now, naturally, what would a newly independent post-colonial country do? Tear the statue down, remove the symbol, reject the colonial legacy. That's what everyone does, right? But when Winsemius said, don't remove it. Why? Because that statue is a message to foreign investors and businesses. That statue says, Singapore isn't offended by its colonial history. Singapore is pragmatic. Singapore is business-friendly. Singapore isn't ideological, it's practical. Come here, your money is safe, your investments are safe. And foreign investors came with billions of dollars. Second piece of advice, exploit your strategic location and existing British naval base infrastructure. The British had a massive naval base in Singapore. When the British were withdrawing, that base was naturally going to close down. This meant thousands of jobs were about to vanish. When Simius said, "Don't panic. Repurpose this infrastructure. Convert the naval base into an industrial zone. Turn the docks into shipyards." This is ready-made infrastructure, and Lee Kuan Yew did exactly that. Semawang Naval Base was converted. Keppel Shipyard was developed. Singapore is today one of the biggest ship repair and shipbuilding centers in the world. A Dutch economist's advice shaped Singapore's economic future. And when Simius, he didn't just come once. He remained Singapore's unofficial economic advisor until 1984, 24 years, pro bono, without a salary, because he believed in Singapore's mission. This is the team, Lee Kuan Yew's team. Diverse, brilliant, complementary. Each one had a unique skill, and all of them were working toward one vision. Now let's come back to that uncomfortable topic I mentioned earlier, the communist allies. Remember? There were two factions inside PAP, the moderates and the communists. Lee Kuan Yew had used the communists for mass support, but now, after becoming PM in 1959, LKY had a decision to make. The communists were becoming increasingly powerful inside PAP. They wanted control of the party. They wanted a genuine communist revolution. Nationalization of industries, state control of the economy, alignment with China and the Soviet Union. Lee Kuan Yew knew, if the communists take control of the party, Singapore's future is over. Foreign investors will flee. Western countries will become hostile. The economy will collapse. So what did Lee Kuan Yew do? He carried out a slow, methodical purge. First, in 1961, the communist faction broke away from PAP and formed their own party, Barisan Sosialis, Socialist Front. This actually turned out to be good for Lee Kuan Yew because now the communists were officially out. PAP was clean. Then, in February 1963, came Operation Cold Store. This was a massive security operation. The British, Malayan, and Singapore governments jointly arrested over 100 left-wing politicians, trade unionists, and activists. In one night, without trial, under the Internal Security Act, leaders of Barisan Sosialis, people like Lim Chin Sayong, who was actually a very popular and charismatic politician, they were all arrested. Some were held in detention for years without trial. Lim Chin Sayong was kept in detention for almost 10 years. Now this is controversial, very controversial. Did Lee Kuan Yew arrest the communists because of a genuine national security threat? Or did he use the security threat as an excuse to eliminate political rivals? This debate continues to this day. Historians are divided. Some say the communist threat was real. It was the Cold War era. Communism was spreading aggressively across Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaya. There were communist insurgencies everywhere, so Lee Kuan Yew's action was justified. Others say Lee Kuan Yew exaggerated the threat for his own political advantage. He compromised democracy. He threw opponents in jail without a fair trial. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. The threat was real, but Lee Kuan Yew also used the threat for his own political benefit. Both things can be simultaneously true. Whatever the case, the result was that after 1963, PAP had virtually complete control over Singapore's politics. The opposition was effectively neutralized, and Lee Kuan Yew now had a free hand to implement his vision. That free hand, that was what was essential for Singapore's rapid development. But it was also what gave Singapore the label of authoritarian. Trade-off, always a trade-off. Now let's talk about the British. The British relationship with Singapore, it's complicated, very complicated. On one hand, the British built a lot in Singapore. They established a civil service. They gave it a legal system based on English common law. They developed the port. They built trading infrastructure. They introduced the English language. They set up an administrative framework. All these things came in handy for Singapore later. Lee Kuan Yew did not destroy the systems the British had built. Unlike many post-colonial leaders who rejected everything their colonizers left behind and ended up hurting their own countries, Lee Kuan Yew said, keep what works, change what doesn't. Pragmatism again. But on the other hand, the British also left Singapore vulnerable, dependent, and underdeveloped. For the British, Singapore was a strategic military base, nothing more. They had no genuine interest in developing Singapore's people. As long as the base was useful, they stayed. When the geopolitical situation changed, they left. And when the British announced their military withdrawal in the 1960s, it was a crisis for Singapore. The British military base was a huge part of Singapore's economy. Thousands of jobs depended directly and indirectly on that base. By one estimate, the British military presence contributed 20% of Singapore's GDP. 20%. Imagine 1/5 of your economy suddenly disappearing one day. Unemployment skyrockets. Businesses shut down. Lee Kuan Yew actually begged British PM Harold Wilson, please slow down the withdrawal. Make it gradual. Give us time to adjust. But the British had their own reasons. Economic pressures, changing priorities, and the withdrawal went ahead. And that was a moment when Singapore, once again, turned crisis into opportunity. The British bases were converted into industrial zones. Self-reliance was built. Defense was developed independently. But there was another important aspect of the British colonial legacy: education and language. The British had run English medium schools, but only for the elite. For the majority Chinese-speaking population, there were Chinese medium schools. There were Malay medium and Tamil medium schools too, meaning education was fragmented, divided along linguistic lines. Lee Kuan Yew later addressed this fragmentation by introducing the bilingual policy. But the British had created this problem in the first place as part of their divide and rule strategy. Now we come to the event that was the most decisive moment in Singapore's destiny: the Malaysia merger. Lee Kuan Yew pushed for Singapore to merge with Malaysia. Why? Economic survival. Singapore was a tiny island. It needed a bigger market. The Malaysian hinterland would provide access. Raw materials would be available. A bigger consumer base would open up. Security. Singapore alone couldn't protect itself. Not from Indonesia, not from communist threats. Merging with Malaysia would create a stronger security framework. Political stability. The merger would also help manage the communist threat because the Malaysian government was anti-communist, and combined forces would make it easier to control the communists. So on September 16, 1963, Singapore, Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak came together to form the Federation of Malaysia. But this marriage was troubled from the very start. What was the problem? Multiple problems. Racial demographics. Malaysia's political structure was based on Malay supremacy, Quechuan and Malaya. The Malay majority was given special privileges in education, in government jobs, in business. Article 153 of the Malaysian Constitution. With Singapore's inclusion, where 75% of the population was Chinese, the overall Chinese population percentage increased in the Federation. Malaysian Malay leaders feared that the Chinese would become economically and politically dominant. Political rivalry. Lee Kuan Yew tried to expand PAP into Malaysian politics as well. He raised the slogan of Malaysian Malaysia, meaning equal rights for all races, no special privileges for any race. This was a direct challenge to Malay supremacy. For Malaysian PM Tunku Abdul Rahman and his party, UMNO, this was unacceptable. 1964 racial riots. Violent riots broke out between the Chinese and Malay communities in Singapore. In July and September, violence on the streets. 36 people died. Hundreds were injured. Curfew was imposed. Tensions got so bad that the Malaysian leadership decided keeping Singapore was more dangerous than letting it go. And on August 9, 1965, that day came when the Malaysian parliament voted unanimously expel Singapore from Federation. Lee Kuan Yew was informed. A deal was negotiated. The separation agreement was signed. And Lee Kuan Yew, as I told you in the introduction, broke down and cried in front of the cameras. But, and this is the inflection point, after those tears, Lee Kuan Yew wiped his eyes, clenched his jaw, and said, fine, if we have to survive alone, we'll survive alone. And not just survive, we'll thrive. Now, Lee Kuan Yew had an independent country, but no economy. So he, along with Go Kang Sui, adopted a bold strategy. While the rest of the developing world was saying, don't come in, foreign companies, we'll do it ourselves, we'll do import substitution, we'll build our own industries, Singapore did the exact opposite. Singapore said, come, everyone come. You come, your money come, your technology come, we'll give you the best environment. Low taxes, minimal bureaucracy, corruption-free administration, a skilled, English-speaking, disciplined workforce, world-class infrastructure, political stability, rule of law. That was Singapore's offer to the world, and the world accepted. Texas Instruments, the American semiconductor company, set up a factory in Singapore. This was a signal. If Texas Instruments is coming, then Singapore is serious. Hewlett-Packard came, National Semiconductor came, Shell and Esso, oil majors, set up massive refineries in Singapore. Singapore didn't have a single drop of oil of its own, but it became one of the biggest oil refining centers in the world. Ironic, isn't it? The very thing you don't even have. You become the processing hub for it. That was genius. Financial institutions came, banks came, insurance companies came, and with every company, jobs came. Technology transfer happened. Skills development happened. Singapore's workers learned global standards. In 1965, unemployment was at crisis levels. By the 1970s, virtually full employment. People were searching for workers. Workers didn't have to search for work. That was the impact of multinationals. Now we come to perhaps the most delicate topic. Singapore's population, 75% Chinese, 15% Malay, 7% Indian, 3% others. This was an explosive mix. The 1964 riots had proven that racial violence was a real threat. In neighboring countries, the 1969 racial riots in Malaysia, anti-Chinese violence in Indonesia, all of this showed that multi-ethnic societies can easily turn violent. For Lee Kuan Yew, this was an existential issue. If the racist fight, Singapore is finished. In such a tiny space, 733 square kilometers, one riot could paralyze the entire country. So what did Lee Kuan Yew do? He built a comprehensive strategy, multi-pronged, covering every aspect of life. 1. Legal equality. Clear provisions in the Constitution. No racial discrimination whatsoever. Equal rights for everyone. No special privileges for anyone. This was directly the opposite of Malaysia, where Malays had special rights. 2. Bilingual education. Every student would learn 2 languages, English as the working language, plus the mother tongue, Chinese, Malay, Tamil. English for global competitiveness, mother tongue for cultural roots. A brilliant balance. 3. HDB racial quotas. This was the most genius move. Racial quotas were set for every block of public housing, HDB flats, meaning how many Chinese families would be in a block, how many Malay, how many Indian. It was all predetermined. You could buy your flat, but you couldn't choose to have all your neighbors be from your own race. This was forced integration. People would have TO live alongside each other, would have TO interact with each other, would have TO get to know each other. At first, people complained. Why? I want to live with my own community. But over time, it worked. Today, Singaporean neighborhoods are genuinely mixed. A Chinese uncle sips coffee with his Malay neighbor. An Indian family gives sweets to their Chinese neighbor's kids during Diwali. This is organic harmony that came from engineered integration. 4. Community institutions. Interracial and religious confidence circles were created. 5. Strict laws against racial incitement. Anyone who spreads racial hatred goes to jail. Anyone who stokes religious tensions faces consequences. The Sedition Act, the Maintenance of Racial Harmony Act. These laws are strict and they are actively enforced. Singapore today is one of the most racially harmonious countries in the world. In a region where racial violence has been common, Singapore broke that pattern, actively, deliberately, systematically. Now let's look at some numbers, because numbers don't lie. In 1965, GDP per capita, roughly $500. 2026, estimated GDP per capita, over $97,000 nominally. That means 194 times growth. Even if you adjust for inflation, it's still dozens of times over. In one generation, life expectancy in the 1960s around 65 years. Today, above 84 years, among the highest in the world. Literacy rate in the 1960s, very low, especially among women and the older generation. Today, virtually 100%. Home ownership, over 90%, among the highest rates in the entire world. And all of this in government-built housing, at affordable prices, financed through CPF, mandatory savings. Corruption index, consistently in the top 5 least corrupt countries in the world. In Asia, usually number 1. Ease of doing business, consistently in the top 3 in World Bank rankings. Starting a business in Singapore is faster, easier, and cheaper than almost anywhere on earth. These numbers aren't just statistics. These are lives, real lives of real people. One generation ago, those who were living in slums. Their children today live in world-class apartments, study in the best schools, and receive treatment in the best hospitals. This is transformation. This is a miracle, and this is a planned, deliberate, systematic miracle. One more important thing, Lee Kuan Yew didn't just build during his own time. He also planned the succession, because a truly great leader is one who leaves behind a system even after he's gone. In 1990, Lee Kuan Yew stepped down from the PM's post after 31 years. His successor was Goh Chok Tong, a capable, steady leader who served from 1990 to 2004. Goh Chok Tong further liberalized Singapore, socially and economically, building on Lee Kuan Yew's foundation. In 2004, Lee Kuan Yew's son, Lee Hsien Loong, became PM. Yes, his son. This was controversial. Allegations of nepotism were made. But Lee Hsien Loong was genuinely qualified, educated at Cambridge, senior wrangler, top mathematics student, had served as a military general, and had handled multiple ministries. Lee Kuan Yew himself remained in the cabinet, first as senior minister, then as minister mentor. He wasn't officially PM anymore, but his influence never ended. As long as he was alive, until March 23, 2015, his presence was felt in Singapore's politics. And when he passed away, listen to this, 1.7 million people stood in line to pay their last respects. In a country with a total population of 5.5 million, 1.7 million people came personally, in a tropical heat, standing in line for hours. They cried. They genuinely cried. They weren't crying for a leader. They were crying for their country, for the man who had given them this country.